Hello, everyone. My name is Talana O'Brien. I'm a supervisor out of the Seattle office of Veteran Readiness and Employment Services. I'm pretty much going to have a PowerPoint that I'll be sharing today to provide a comprehensive overview of Veteran Readiness and Employment Services. And so you'll see me turn off my camera just for that PowerPoint, but I at least wanted to say hello and just show my face before I began. Okay, and I just want to make sure that everyone can can see my screen.
I can see it
If
on
you
my
cannot
end.
see my screen for whatever reason, just let me know.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so again, as I mentioned, I'm a supervisor out of the Seattle office for Veteran Readiness and Employment Services. It's also known as VRNE under the Department of Veteran Affairs. And essentially today, I'm gonna actually start my show here with help. Sorry about that. Wanted to just kind of give a comprehensive overview of what VRNE is. VRNE is an employment-based service with the ultimate goal being to help an individual obtain employment. The purpose of VRNE is to help individuals, particularly veterans with disabilities, maintain and obtain employment. Some of the services that VRNE can provide includes training. This could be college related or vocational training, as well as employment services. However, it should be noted that all of these services that are provided essentially are provided with the idea that to help the individual obtain employment. So I'm going to move to my second slide here, which is about eligibility and entitlement. Hopefully, okay, so make sure I'm in the right slide. Sorry about that. So there is a difference between eligibility and entitlement. Really, as it pertains to eligibility for the program, this means that an individual has applied, it meets the basic criteria, including dates for service, discharge status, and disability rating. Eligibility does not indicate a person is entitled to the program. Entitlement to the program is determined once the individual completes the initial orientation appointment and is determined to have an employment handicap. So just to kind of provide a little more context, eligibility is essentially really at the baseline. Anyone that is a veteran can apply for services, but that does not necessarily mean that they are entitled to services. So if someone is eligible, what that means is that they can apply. And then as it pertains to entitlement, what that means is once someone does apply to services, they can meet with the counselor after they apply for services, in which the counselor would then obtain comprehensive information as it pertains to their employment, their medical history, things of that nature. And that information is used to determine if they are entitled to services. Okay. So entitlement decision. So to kind of give a little more further information as it relates to this, the entitlement decision is the determination that an individual with eligibility meets the established standards related to an EH and SEH. The counselor makes this determination. So EH and SEH, EH stands for employment handicap and SEH stands for serious employment handicap. This is important to note because this will be something that the counselor will determine as they are making their entitlement decision. And to provide a little more context, an employment handicap is considered an impairment that impacts a veteran's ability to prepare for, obtain, or retain employment consistent with the veteran's abilities, aptitudes, and interests. A serious employment handicap is also very similar. It's also a significant impairment that also impacts a veteran's ability to prepare for, obtain, or retain employment. However, the key difference is between the two that in order for a veteran to be determined to have a serious employment handicap, they have to have a service-connected disability that's rated at 10% or more. And just to provide a little more information as it pertains to service-connected disability. A service-connected disability is a disability that is incurred or aggravated while a service member was on active duty in the military for which he or she may have been compensated. So generally, anyone that comes to VRE services or applies for services, typically the individual will have a service-connected disability for one or more disabilities, and that has already taken place prior to coming to see a counselor at VRE. One second here. Okay, there we go. Okay. And so I want to explain a little more about what a vocational impairment is. A vocational impairment is an impairment due to service-connected disabilities, also known in parentheses as SCDs, in combination with other vocationally relevant factors. In addition, the term impairment means the restrictions on employability caused by one or more of the following factors: effects of the individual's service-connected and non-service connected disabilities, deficiencies in education and training, negative attitudes toward the disabled, and other pertinent factors. These factors, these factors result not only in restrictions on employability, but also in a lack of stable, continuing, suitable employment. So an individual is said to have a vocational impairment under one or more of the following conditions. Disabilities limit employability in occupations for which similarly circumstanced non-disabled persons compete and qualify. Training and education do not qualify him or her for suitable employment. And the evaluation identified other restrictions on employment that resulted in the absence of stable, continuing, and suitable employment. So really a good example as it pertains to a vocational impairment is perhaps someone who may be service connected for post-traumatic stress disorder, and who maybe also has maybe experienced symptoms as a result of post-traumatic stress disorder, maybe severe symptoms. So as it relates to post-traumatic stress disorder, this condition may make it difficult for this individual to obtain or maintain employment for a long period of time. So this could be considered a vocational impairment, or determine that a person has a vocational impairment. Okay. And so in this slide, I wanted to kind of go over the steps in the process that a counselor would typically go through for someone who, essentially comes to VRE and applies for services. The first step the counselor will do is to determine the vocational impairment. They would also identify any service-connected disabilities. The third step a counselor would go through is identifying the extent to which an SCD contributes to the vocational impairment. The counselor also determine if the individual has overcome the vocational impairment. And step 5, the counselor will determine if the individual's SCD and vocational impairment constitute them having an employment handicap or serious employment handicap. And lastly, the counselor would determine the individual's entitlement to VRE services. And just to provide a little more context as it relates to these steps, in step 1, the counselor will determine the vocational impairment, and what this entails is looking for education and training deficiencies, such as lack of a college degree, lack of certification, or skills used in the military that are not transferable to the labor market. In steps 2 and 3, the counselor will conduct a dialogue with the individual to determine the service-connected disability and the extent to which the service-connected disability contributes to vocational impairment by reviewing medical records, health issues, and rating decisions. In step 4, the counselor will determine if the individual has overcome the vocational impairment by reviewing work history, current employment, and pattern of reliance on government support. And in step 5, the counselor determines if the impairment constitutes an employment handicap, which is an impairment resulting in substantial part from an SED that affects the ability to prepare for, obtain, or maintain suitable employment that is consistent with abilities, aptitudes, and interests. And finally, in step 6, the counselor is going to essentially make an entitlement determination. And I'm going to go to the next slide here. One of the things that's used to determine if someone is entitled to services, if someone begins the process and does apply to VRNE, there is a document called a rehabilitation needs inventory. That is something that would be given to the individual that is applying to services prior to their appointment, their initial appointment with a counselor. This document, rehabilitation needs inventory, it's also known as the 1902W. It's used to capture pertinent information about the individual civilian and military history. This information will include employment history, transferable skills, education background, medical issues and treatment, financial and housing details, and other pertinent information provided by the veteran. And there is something else I just want to touch on here called prior program participants. So it should be noted that VRNE provides training. When VRNE provides training to someone, if they are found entitled to services, when they successfully complete training and obtain suitable employment, their case is considered positively closed out when they no longer need the services. However, there are instances in which someone may reapply for services after successfully completing services with VRNE. And this slide addressed prior program participants. And VRNE services are only available to prior program participants in certain instances. So if the veteran SED conditions have worsened, which precludes him or her from performing the job requirements for which he or she was previously declared rehabilitated. The previous employment for which he or she was previously declared rehabilitated is determined to be unsuitable based on the individual's specific employment, handicap, and capabilities. And also noted here, the counselor is allowed to reinstitute services and assistance only if unsatisfactory conduct or cooperation will likely not reoccur, and the rehabilitation program, whether same or revised, is determined unsuitable. So a good example that could be used here is if someone was previously working in maybe a labor-intensive or physically demanding job, if for whatever reason they have new service-connected disabilities or even current service-connected disabilities that have worsened, and they can no longer perform a physically demanding occupation, this is where they may reapply for services because the first time that they receive VRNE services and they obtain maybe training and was able to get a particular job, they can possibly no longer work within that employment.
Luana, there is a question that popped up in the chat, and
Sure.
it's, can VRNE be used to obtain a master's degree if the degree is in a different field than the applicant's bachelor's degree?
So it kind of depends. So really what would be looked at is if the person can no longer work in the industry that they obtain their bachelor's degree in. So really, because VRNE, with it being an employment-based service, it's really designed to help individuals obtain suitable employment. So if it's seen that the bachelor's degree that the person has, if they're able to get other jobs within that profession based on that bachelor's degree, then it wouldn't be seen that a master's degree is necessarily needed because VRNE does not support advanced education. It's more education if it's needed in order for the person to obtain competitive employment. I hope that helps. Does that answer your question?
They said thank you.
Okay. Okay. This slide here, I also wanted to kind of cover is something called automatic entitlement, also known as NDAA. Really, a lot of times, someone may come to apply for VRE services. They may not necessarily be a veteran or discharged from the military, and that's where these particular special cases would apply. So it says here on the second bullet point here, a service member is an individual that has not yet been discharged from the military. It is important that the service member completes the initial evaluation and entitlement determination prior to being discharged from the military in order to be found automatically entitled under this program. So there are certain circumstances where someone is in the process of being discharged, but in these particular circumstances, they can automatically be found entitled. And this is only important to note because this circumstance is different from someone who's a veteran who applies to services and the counselor has to find them entitled based on their medical history, their employment, education, and things of that nature. So I just wanted to kind of show this slide just to note that there are other scenarios outside of someone already being completely discharged. Okay, and there is instances where we do offer employment services only. So there is special criteria as it pertains to this. So an individual may be eligible for employment services only if special criteria is met. The following are criteria for a program. The following criteria for a program of employment services only is if someone has a service-connected disability of 10% or more, if they're determined employable in a suitable occupation, and if a prior rehabilitation program participant either within VRE or within a program outside of VRE. And the reason I wanted to kind of show this also is because a lot of times when people apply to VRE, it's not always guaranteed that they participate in training, whether it's college related or vocational training. Pretty much what's determined in regards to the services they will be receiving is on a case by case basis. So sometimes if a person is found entitled, if it's determined that they have sufficient training to find employment, there may be instances where they may only receive employment services only, as opposed to training, whether it's vocational or college related, if it's determined that they have enough skills to already be employed. Okay, and I wanted to ask if there was any questions. I know there was one in the chat, but if there's any additional questions, I can answer them at this time.